A summer evening descended on the suburban neighborhood of Pine Hill, bathed in the soft light of sunset. The air was warm and humid. The trees swayed lazily in the occasional breeze, and from the front porches came the voices and laughter of residents enjoying the peace of the quiet. For the Reed family, this was another candlelight dinner that had become almost a tradition. Harmony seemed to reign in their cozy home, overlooking a perfectly manicured garden. Mia Reed deftly arranged the dishes on the snow-white tablecloth on the antique wooden table. Everything was perfect: pasta with basil, green salad, and glasses of red wine. Leo finished talking on the phone, walked to the table and smiled at his wife, his warm gaze seeming filled with tenderness and serenity. "You're beautiful as always," he said, taking a seat across from her. Mia met his eyes for a moment and then looked away, fixing a strand of hair. She had a strange feeling that there was something more behind all those nice words. "Thank you." She sipped her wine, trying to hide her thoughts. They embraced each other with a look and talked about the plans for the weekend. "I think we should finally go on that trip we've been dreaming about," Leo suggested, enthusiastically arranging the food on the plates. "How about a trip to the sea? We could spend a week there, just the two of us, disconnecting from everything." "The sea sounds wonderful," Mia said, feeling her heart clench with a feeling she couldn't quite explain. It seemed that this idyll was too perfect, as if everything that was happening was just a beautiful screen. The silence of the suburban street added to the sense of calm and safety. The Reed house, surrounded by small but expensive cottages, was an example of coziness and stability. But even in places like Pine Hill, behind high fences and exquisite interiors, there could be problems lurking without anyone realizing it. Mia looked at her husband, but she no longer saw the Leo she used to know. Something had changed, and that something worried her more every day. Maybe she was too suspicious, but her intuition, always so sharp, told her that Leo was hiding something. But what was it? When they had finished dinner, Leo suggested a walk in the garden. They walked hand in hand along the stone-paved path, discussing the future. Leo seemed completely focused on their conversation, on their plans. But something in his demeanor made Mia doubtful. It seemed to her that he was too perfect. When they got back to the house, Leo received a text message on his phone. He frowned for a moment and quickly closed the screen. That moment didn't escape Mia's eyes, and her suspicions grew. What could be so important that could have happened at that moment? She knew Leo was attentive to work, but he had become even more secretive in recent weeks. "Who is it?" she asked, trying to keep her tone innocent. Leo looked up and smiled. "Nothing important," he answered. "Just one of the patients. I'll need to stop by the hospital tomorrow." Mia nodded, but things were boiling inside her. She began to notice these little things more and more often. The late calls, the short texts, the trips he wouldn't tell her about. They were just small pieces of the puzzle, but they were adding up to something more serious. Mia wasn't going to jump to conclusions, but her anxiety was growing by the day. A few houses away, in a cottage surrounded by flowering shrubs, sat Steve and Lisa Henderson. They had been neighbors of the Reeds for several years and often spent time together. Lisa, a stylish woman with long curly hair and impeccable taste, seemed the epitome of confidence and strength. Steve was her complete opposite. Quiet, a little sullen, he rarely showed his emotions, but the tension in their relationship could be felt even from the outside. "Do you think the Reeds are really happy?" Steve asked, biting his lips nervously as they sat on the veranda with glasses of wine. Lisa smiled, but her eyes were cold. "Every couple looks happy until the crack shows," she said without taking her eyes off her glass. "I guess they have their secrets too, like the rest of us." Steve looked at her, trying to figure out exactly what she meant. He knew that their own marriage was far from perfect. Their relationship was becoming more strained with each passing year, and neither party was in any hurry to fix it. "Are you talking about us?" he asked, trying not to sound too sharp. "Maybe," Lisa replied, her gaze becoming detached again. She was tired of endlessly trying to maintain the appearance of happiness in front of her friends and neighbors. Lisa and Steve were the kind of couple that always seemed to be the model for others, but behind closed doors lurked anger, jealousy, and mistrust. Still, there was something about the Reeds' relationship that drew her attention. She often looked at Mia with envy. She seemed like a confident and calm woman, but that mask could hide anything. Lisa knew that no marriage was perfect. Meanwhile, Mia returned to their bedroom, where Leo was getting ready for bed. She glanced at the dresser where his things lay. Her gaze lingered on an old leather wallet that he rarely reached for. Suddenly, her attention was caught by a small object peeking out of his jacket pocket, tossed on the chair. It was a cell phone, not at all the kind Leo usually used. It looked plain and old, and Mia couldn't remember ever seeing it before. While Leo was in the bathroom, Mia carefully pulled out the phone and turned it on. A missed message icon flashed on the screen. She opened it and read it. "Meet me tomorrow at 7. All set. K." Mia's heart beat faster. Who was K? Why hadn't Leo told her about this meeting? She quickly hid the phone back when she heard her husband's footsteps. "Is everything okay?" Leo asked, coming out of the bathroom. "Yes, of course," Mia smiled, though everything was churning inside her. Her suspicions were now a reality. The next few days passed in a normal rhythm, but the tension inside Mia was growing. She started to notice more and more strange things. One day while cleaning the house, she accidentally came across a small box in the garage, the key to which was in the glove compartment of Leo's car. Inside were papers in a different name and several keys similar to those used for warehouses or private rooms. Her mind frantically tried to put the pieces of this puzzle together. Leo was clearly hiding something, but what? She couldn't just accuse him without having all the evidence. But what she had already learned made her heart clench with anxiety. Mia didn't know what to do with this information yet. Talking to Leo right now would be too risky. He was too good at hiding his intentions and being persuasive, so she decided to say nothing for now and watch his future actions. The summer heat was gradually receding, giving way to the cool of the evening. The Reed house was deceptively quiet. Leo was working late, as usual, and his evening calls were becoming more and more frequent, which worried Mia. She sat in their bedroom, aimlessly leafing through a book, not noticing the words on the pages. Her thoughts returned again and again to the phone calls, the strange keys, and all the things she had begun to find since her anxiety had begun to slowly but surely take control of her mind. Pinned to the mirror opposite the bed was an antique silver brooch Mia had gotten from her grandmother. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was a symbol of family continuity that Mia had once worn proudly. But now the brooch hung on the mirror as a mute witness to their rapidly developing internal conflict. Lately, the brooch had become a symbol to her of something lost, something that had been in her marriage before, but seemed to have disappeared. Ever since she'd found Leo's cell phone, her suspicions had only increased. She knew. A respected doctor who worked late into the night, a beloved husband and pillar of their small world, Leo was no longer the man she knew. It had started with little things. He laughed less often, his kisses became a formality, and his dinner conversations were no longer frank. Instead, they slipped into excuses, evasive answers, and Leo became more withdrawn every day. He was slipping away from her, and she could feel it on some deep level. It had been days since she'd found the phone, but Mia was hesitant to ask Leo directly, though she considered the possibility. Something inside told her it was best to take her time. The waiting was agonizing, but she needed to know more before she threw accusations around. One of the stranger things was his leaving for night calls at the hospital. It used to be rare, and Leo had always been happy to talk about his patients, sometimes sharing stories of how he helped people. But now his departures had become frequent, and more importantly, they were accompanied by a cold, mechanical rhetoric. Mia noticed that his answers were becoming one-word answers. Once, he gave no explanation at all as to why he had left for an entire night. Mia's anxiety was growing by the day, and she couldn't just let it go. Late one night, when Leo left for another call, she decided to do something she would never have done before: search his things. Searching through the drawers in his office, Mia found another clue. It was a key, a simple metal key that seemed to mean nothing. But the key had a small number engraved on it: 43. She didn't know what it could be from, but her intuition told her it was something important. In the garage, where she'd gone immediately after her find, Mia noticed a metal cabinet that hadn't caught her eye before. It stood in the corner, locked with a lock she didn't even know existed. The cabinet was quite sturdy, with a heavy door, and the key she'd found fit it. Mia stood looking at the cabinet for a long time before she decided to open it. Fear for the future and curiosity struggled inside her. She had to find out the truth. In the closet, she found several folders of documents. Inside them were real estate purchase agreements, copies of ID cards. Each one had a man she recognized as Leo on it, but the names were different. They were forged documents. Her heart sank. This meant only one thing. Leo was leading a double life. Her head spun. Everything seemed to be upside down. Who was he really? What was he hiding from her? Why is he doing this? And more importantly, what else is he capable of hiding? Suddenly, an antique silver brooch on the mirror caught her eye. It seemed to remind her of the days when their life was simple, real, without secrets. Mia took the brooch in her hands and squeezed it tightly. She was determined to find out what was going on. While Leo was out of the house, Mia noticed movement in the street. It was their neighbors, Steve and Lisa Henderson. The two had always had a seemingly perfect life, but lately, Mia observed, their relationship had begun to crack at the seams. She'd heard screams coming from the Henderson house on late nights when Lisa returned from work later than usual. And now, standing on the porch, Mia saw Steve leaving the house, tensely pacing the gravel of the driveway. At that moment, Mia felt a sudden urge to talk to Lisa, to find out what was going on between them, perhaps to find comfort in the realization that she wasn't the only one going through such anxieties in her marriage. But an inner voice stopped her. She needed to focus on her own problems, so she headed back to the house. In the evening, Leo returned later than usual. His eyes were tired, or maybe it was more than that. Remorse? Mia decided not to start a conversation about the findings. She wanted to be sure of her suspicions before she confronted him openly. However, every move he made, every little thing he did, was beginning to make her suspicious. Why did he avert his eyes so often? Why was his phone always lying screen down? Soon they met the Hendersons for dinner. It was another evening of seemingly perfect friendship between the two families, but the facade of that relationship hid cracks. During dinner, Steve and Leo were secluded on the terrace, discussing something in a half voice. Mia tried to listen, but all she could make out was Steve's phrase, "Do you realize this could ruin everything?" Leo replied something inaudible, but it was clear from his tone that he was anxious. When the men returned to the table, the atmosphere was tense. Mia exchanged glances with Lisa, and the latter seemed to realize something was going on, but didn't dare to ask. The evening went on, but everyone involved felt something inevitable looming over them. At night, when Leo fell asleep, Mia could no longer hold in her accumulated emotions. She needed to talk to him. She could no longer live in fear and uncertainty, not knowing who was beside her, not knowing what else her husband was hiding. Mia quietly rose from the bed, glanced cautiously at the sleeping Leo, and walked over to the mirror before deciding to have a frank conversation. Her gaze fell on the silver brooch she had repinned to the mirror after holding it in her hands. The brooch seemed to her a symbol of something that had once been indestructible, but was now as fragile as glass. The next morning, Mia was determined. She made breakfast as usual, put the cups on the table, but it all seemed mechanical. Her thoughts were preoccupied with one thing. She had to get Leo to tell her the truth. When he sat down at the table, Mia gathered her courage and said quietly, "Leo, we need to talk." Her voice sounded firm, and Leo froze, not raising his eyes to her. Night had fallen on the Reed house, filling it with thick darkness. Mia sat at the table in the kitchen, watching the clock on the wall and listening for every rustle. Leo was due back from another call to the hospital, but she couldn't shake the thought that he was lying again. Every word he said seemed false to her now, every action a lie. Time dragged on unbearably slowly, as if the very space around her was soaking up her growing anxiety. There was the sound of a car pulling up outside, and a moment later the door slammed shut. Leo entered, a tired mask on his face, as if he'd been through a long day at work. However, Mia no longer believed his tiredness. She knew something was wrong. "Hi," Leo said tiredly, taking off his jacket and throwing it on the back of a chair. Mia watched him silently, clutching her coffee cup as if her life depended on it. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it could be heard throughout the kitchen. "Leo, we need to talk," she finally said, trying to keep her voice calm, though the tension in her every word betrayed everything she was feeling. Leo stopped, looking at her in surprise. He already knew this conversation didn't bode well. "About what?" he asked, squinting his eyes as if trying to read her thoughts. "About us, and your double life." His eyes narrowed, and he took a step toward the table, folding his arms across his chest. In the silence, something could be heard dripping from the faucet in the sink, but they both ignored the sound. "What are you talking about? What's all this nonsense?" Leo's voice became harsh, a note of irritation in it. "I found your papers." Mia abruptly pushed back her chair and stood up, heading for the locker where a folder containing the very papers she had found in the garage lay. She tossed them on the table in front of him. "All of it. Another name, another life, other people. You think I don't understand what's going on?" Leo froze, his face pale, but he quickly pulled himself together. "It's not what you think," he began, trying to find the words. "It's just part of the job, a cover-up. You don't understand." "A cover for what? What do you need so many lies for?" Mia's voice grew louder, the anger that had been building up for so long coming out. "How many more secrets, Leo? How long did you plan to keep me in the dark?" Leo rubbed his forehead in frustration, as if that would help him focus. His attempt to deny everything was crumbling before his eyes. "Mia, listen to me, I did this for us. For our safety." She laughed, but the laugh was bitter and full of pain. "For us? Lies and secrets for us? Are you kidding me? That's not caring, that's betrayal!" Her voice shook with rage. "You're not just lying to me, you're lying to everyone around you. And I can't live like this anymore." Leo tensed as if he'd been hit. He tried to say something, but Mia wasn't listening. "I'm leaving, Leo," she continued. "If you don't stop this right now, I'm going to file for divorce. And believe me, I'll make sure the world knows who you really are." Those words, like daggers, penetrated to the very depths of his soul. He couldn't believe his ears. Mia had never spoken that way, never threatened him, but now she was ready for anything. Her eyes glittered with rage and pain, and it finally pissed him off. "You don't know what you're doing," he hissed through gritted teeth. "It's not as easy as you think. I'm doing this for our family." "It's not my family anymore, Leo," she replied coldly. "I won't live with a man who betrayed me." Leo flinched at her words, his hands clenched into fists. In that second, something changed in his gaze, as if the line he had long hesitated to cross had finally been crossed. "You're not leaving," he said quietly, but threateningly. "I've already made up my mind." Mia turned around, heading for the door, but he quickly grabbed her arm. His grip was firm, almost painful. "You're not leaving," he repeated, looking into her eyes with desperation. "You can't." Mia pulled out of his arms and took a step back. "Look at you, Leo. You don't even realize that you've already lost me. I'm leaving and you can't stop me." Leo took a step toward her, but Mia raised her hand, stopping him. "Stop it!" she shouted. "It's over." She turned away and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Leo in complete silence. He stood there, unable to comprehend what had happened. His wife's words echoed in his head until he slammed his fist on the table in a frenzy. The noise of the blow echoed throughout the house, like a signal that something had been destroyed forever. Late in the evening, silence came to the Reed house. Mia was in her room upstairs, packing her things, mentally preparing to leave the house and start a new life. Her mind was spinning with thoughts of the divorce, the lawyer, and a future she dreaded, but which, despite everything, seemed like a liberation. Downstairs in the living room, Leo was walking in circles, unable to find his place. He felt the ground go from under his feet. His world was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do about it. His thoughts were jumbled, and at some point, he decided that things could still be fixed. He needed to talk to Mia again, explain things to her, make her understand. But by the time he got upstairs, it was too late. The next morning, the silence in the house was broken by loud screams. The entire street was awakened by police sirens when arriving officers discovered Mia Reed's body in the bedroom. Her dead body was lying on the floor, her face contorted with horror. At first glance, everything indicated that the death was the result of a brutal attack. Leo was found in the house, in a state of shock. He claimed to have been on night duty when it all happened, but neighbors claimed to have heard screams and noises coming from the house late at night. Especially Steve Henderson, who testified to police that he saw Leo late at night in the house. The police immediately launched an investigation. At first glance, it looked like a random murder, perhaps a robbery gone wrong. There were signs of a struggle in the house, but nothing had been stolen. However, Leo, despite his claims of an alibi, became the prime suspect. Detectives examined the scene, scrutinizing every detail. The antique brooch that had once adorned the bedroom mirror now lay on the floor as the last mute witness to the tragedy. It was covered in bloodstains. Officers began questioning neighbors. Steve Henderson, despite his erratic behavior, gave a clear statement about what he heard that night. "I was at home when I heard the screams," he told detectives. "It was around midnight. At first I thought it was just another argument, but then it got quiet. Honestly, I didn't know what to do." The detectives nodded, writing down his words. However, one of them sensed something wrong. The darkness slowly receded, giving way to a somber gray morning. The Reed house was surrounded by police cars and fence bands. Detectives and experts walked down the street, examining every inch of the grounds. There was tension in the air, as if the house itself had absorbed the atmosphere of tragedy. At the center of everything that was happening stood two detectives, Marcus Lowry and Cassandra Green. Both experienced and determined, they had worked together for years and knew each other down to the smallest detail. Their methods sometimes differed, but that was what made their tandem strong. Marcus, a tall and muscular man with a serious look and a husky voice, was someone who was used to getting his way. He was methodical and prone to logical analysis. Cassandra, on the other hand, had an intuitive flair and the ability to see things in people that they were hiding even from themselves. She was of medium build with short, slightly curly hair, and her discerning eyes were always looking for more than just physical clues. Marcus stood at the bedroom window, studying the surroundings. Cassandra watched him from across the room, occasionally casting glances at the photographs hanging on the walls. "What do you think?" Cassandra asked quietly, breaking the silence. "Something doesn't add up here," Marcus answered, keeping his eyes on the window. At first glance, it looks like a robbery, but nothing of value was missing. The doors and windows were locked from the inside. "It looks like a staging area." "You're right, and if it was a robbery, at least the perp tried to break in. But not a single sign of forced entry," Cassandra added, shaking her head. "We're seeing the classic locked room pattern." Marcus turned away from the window and walked over to the desk where the papers that Mia had managed to find before she died lay. He picked up one of the folders and opened it. "The papers she found look suspicious, but there's nothing concrete here. They're just copies. It's all too neat." Cassandra stepped closer and looked at the documents and remarked, "If she found something really important, maybe that's what caused her death. But who would have known about it so soon?" Marcus thought for a second. Leo, maybe? He knew she had found something, and he might have been trying to prevent her from leaving. The fight could have escalated into something more. And then what happened happened. "Do you think it was him?" Cassandra raised her eyebrows. "I'm not sure. His alibi is still being checked, but the neighbors claim they heard screams in the house. We'll have to question him again." At the police station, Leo sat at a table in the interrogation room, his hands clenched, his gaze blank. He looked tired, lost, and possibly scared. The detectives entered the room and sat down across from him. "Leo," Marcus began, wasting no time, "we want to ask you some questions again. You said you were at work the night of the murder, is that correct?" Leo nodded. "Yes, I was on duty. I can prove it." His voice was hoarse with tension. "Your coworkers confirm that you were indeed at the hospital until midnight," Cassandra said, looking at him intently. "But there is one point. You could have gone home after your shift. The neighbors say they heard noises and screams in your house." Leo froze, his breathing becoming ragged. "That's impossible," he said, shaking his head in shock. "I was at the hospital. I didn't come home." "Then why is your neighbor Steve Henderson claiming otherwise? Marcus asked, watching Leo's reaction carefully. Leo fell silent, his face tense. "Steve," he began, licking his lips nervously. "He and I had a strained relationship. He was always too nosy, meddling in the wrong things. But he's lying. I wasn't home at the time." "You're saying Steve is lying?" Cassandra interjected. "Yes. He's never loved me. Maybe he just wants to blame it on me." Marcus and Cassandra exchanged glances. "Okay, Leo, we'll check your alibi again," Marcus said, standing up. "But there is one more question." Leo looked up, expecting a punch. "An antique brooch, your wife's family heirloom, is missing. Do you know anything about it?" Leo looked surprised, but quickly pulled himself together. "The brooch? I didn't know it was missing. It was a prized possession for Mia. She kept it in her bedroom, on the mirror." "The brooch was found in your neighbor's belongings, Lisa Henderson's," Cassandra said calmly. "She claimed it was a gift from you." Leo's face contorted. "What? That's impossible. I never gave her anything like that. It must be a misunderstanding." Cassandra frowned. "Perhaps, but Lisa assures me that you gave her this gift recently. Are you sure you're not confusing things?" "No." Leo rose from his seat, clasping his hands together nervously. "I don't know what she's imagining, but I didn't give her that brooch. That's bullshit." Marcus nodded and stood up from the table. "All right, Leo. That's all for now. You can go home, but don't leave town." Leo walked out of the room, leaving the detectives alone with their thoughts. "Do you think he's telling the truth?" Cassandra asked. Marcus shrugged his shoulders. "Maybe he is, but Lisa is clearly hiding something." The detective's next step was to interview the Hendersons. Steve and Lisa had lived next door to the Reeds for several years, and during that time their relationship with Leo and Mia had changed like the weather. Lisa met them at the door with an unnatural smile on her face, but Marcus noticed immediately that there was concern in her eyes. "Good morning, detectives," she said, inviting them in. "What can I do for you?" Marcus and Cassandra took a seat on the couch, and Lisa sat down across from him, nervously twiddling her fingers. "Lisa, we'd like to talk to you about the brooch that was found in your house," Cassandra began. "You said it was a gift from Leo?" Lisa nodded, her gaze darting around the room, avoiding meeting the detectives. "Yes, he gave it to me a few weeks ago, said it was a gift, but asked me not to tell anyone." "Was it a gift for a special occasion?" Marcus asked, squinting his eyes. Lisa hesitated. "No, he just said it was a token of appreciation." Marcus and Cassandra exchanged glances. "Lisa, were you and Leo having an affair?" Cassandra asked directly, her voice soft but insistent. Lisa flared up, her hands beginning to tremble. "No," she began, but her voice shook and she was suddenly silent. "Okay, yes, there was an affair, but it was over. We never saw each other again. I didn't think it would go this far." Marcus leaned forward. "Lisa, you have to be honest with us. We can't let this go unchecked." The Reed house was once again the focus of police and media attention. The press was out for blood, swarming to the gates hoping to get a scoop. A murder in such a quiet Iowa neighborhood where everyone knew each other came as a shock to the locals. But for Marcus Lowry and Cassandra Green, this case was more than just another puzzle. It was a personal challenge. The police already knew that Leo was far from a perfect husband. An affair with his neighbor Lisa, financial difficulties, disagreements with his wife all pointed to his problems. But no matter how hard the detectives dug, there was no clear evidence of Leo's involvement in Mia's murder. Cassandra's intuition, however, told her that Leo's secrets were deeper than they appeared at first glance. "We need to dig further," she said quietly, staring at the documents in front of her. "There's something wrong here." "Yes, something is definitely slipping away," Marcus agreed, holding Leo's phone records for the last few months. "I've already listened to the records. Many of the conversations seem normal at first glance, but one of the numbers is repeated too often, and the calls are made at specific times." Cassandra frowned, looking at the list of numbers. "It could be a clue. See if you can find out who that number belongs to," she suggested. When the test results came back, they pointed to a man with a criminal record. The man, known as Carl "Smokey" Wilson, was listed in the database as an ex-con involved in money laundering and drug trafficking. "This is it," Cassandra whispered. "Leo is involved in dirty deeds, and it clearly had something to do with Mia's murder." The detectives went to meet with Smokey. The conversation was brief, but informative. Wilson didn't deny that he had been in contact with Leo, but refused to give details of their dealings. He did, however, casually let slip that Mia was always prying where she shouldn't have been. This phrase made the detectives think. It seemed that Mia had learned something that threatened Leo's secret life. She could become dangerous to him, not only as a wife demanding a divorce, but also as a witness willing to publicize his illegal affairs. Marcus and Cassandra decided to deepen the investigation, paying attention to Leo's inner circle and his contacts with the world of crime. Their suspicions were confirmed. Leo was involved in illegal money laundering operations through his business. However, Leo himself could be used in a dark game by more powerful figures, and his relationship with Mia became an additional risk factor. While the detectives were trying to figure out who might have wanted Mia dead, they managed to discover that Steve Henderson, a neighbor they had already heard about from Lisa, might be much more involved in the case than they had previously thought. Alongside this, Lisa gradually revealed the whole truth about her affair with Leo. Lisa Henderson at the first interrogation seemed to be just a victim of passion, but Cassandra, listening to her words, noticed one important detail. There was an inexcusable carelessness in her story. She mentioned that Leo had given her the brooch after one of the meetings. According to Leo, however, the brooch had belonged to Mia and had never left the bedroom. Marcus decided to put pressure on Lisa, and it got results. In the second interrogation, she confessed that Steve, her husband, was involved in Leo's dark dealings. Steve had secretly assisted him in illegal operations and knew more about Leo's activities than Leo realized. Lisa didn't want to reveal the whole truth, but, under pressure from the detectives, began to reveal how Steve had tried to intimidate Mia when she began to suspect something amiss. Mia had learned too much. She was finding documents, phone numbers, account numbers. She was going to tell the police about everything. But as it turned out, Steve and Leo were on the same side in this conflict. The detectives gathered enough evidence to go back to Steve. After questioning him once again, they got on his nerves, forcing him to confess his involvement in Mia's murder. It turned out that his job was only to intimidate Mia into silence. But things didn't go according to plan. That fateful evening, Steve burst into the Reed home, expecting to be able to talk Mia out of the case and not ruin their lives. But the conversation got out of hand, and when Mia said she would tell the police everything she'd learned, Steve angrily grabbed the object at his fingertips, an old statue on the dresser. The blow was too strong. Steve claimed he didn't mean to kill her. It was an accident. But the fact remained that Mia was dead, and Steve was in a situation from which he saw no way out. "I didn't know what to do." His voice shook as he told the detectives. "I was just trying to protect myself and my family. If Mia had told everything, it would have ruined us." When Leo learned that his neighbor had become his wife's killer, he was shocked. But what shocked him most of all was that he himself was involved in the chain of events that led to Mia's death. His illegal operations, his affair with Lisa, and his weakness to the underworld caused the tragedy. Leo was arrested for his involvement in criminal activity, although his direct involvement in the murder could not be proven. Steve Henderson received a harsh sentence for manslaughter, but his ties to Leo and their shared shady dealings also played a part in his conviction. Cassandra and Marcus, after completing their investigation, realized how fragile life can be when people start playing with fire. Secrets, infidelity, money, and fear all mixed into a deadly cocktail that cost Mia's life. A few months after the case was over, Marcus and Cassandra met at a coffee shop to discuss the past investigation. Both realized that the case had left an imprint on them. "Sometimes I think you and I are more than just detectives," Cassandra said, staring out the window thoughtfully. "It's like we're digging into the dark corners of people's souls." "Maybe you're right," Marcus agreed, sipping his coffee. "But it's our job, and someone has to do it." They sat in silence, each absorbed in his own thoughts.